The View ends. Kash Patel. Schools. The View hosts. Joy melts down on air. The studio lights brightened to a hum as The View began taping. The iconic set, the soaring windows, the polished desk, the applause track cued and ready welcomed its daily guests and co-hosts. Kash Patel, former senior national security advisor under Trump and one of the most outspoken conservative voices in Washington, stood just off stage. He adjusted his lapel and scanned the audience, a composed figure masking a mind abuzz with strategy. The panelists Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin settled into their chairs, scripts in hand, smiles primed. Kash took a breath, walked on, and took his seat. Cameras clicked, audience murmurs quieted. The energy shifted. This was no ordinary segment. Whoopi, flashing her signature grin, leaned in. Today, we've got Kash Patel. She began, her tone breezy but loaded, a former Trump aide back under the spotlight. Before Kash could respond, Joy jumped in, eyebrows raised like she'd caught him in a prank. Kash, I've got to ask, do you think you're a 10 too? Or did Trump just pick you for the TV cameras? A ripple of amused whispers passed through the audience. That was the opening salvo, dismissive, superficial, setting the stage for a clash that was already brewing. Kash smiled, calm but pointed. Joy, I expected questions about national security or the riots or election fraud, but apparently the image is the story today. The audience tensed. He'd caught her off guard. Sunny leaned forward, tone clipped. But Kash, we're talking media bias, wokeness, identity politics. You're Indian American. Do you feel your background helps you fit in or paint you as a token? The question felt loaded, polite on the surface, hard-edged underneath. Kash's silence stretched for a beat. Then, without hesitation, he answered, Sunny, my background isn't a prop, it's a perspective. I'm not here to be the poster boy of anything. I'm here to speak the truth. At the camera swung to Joy, whose smile tightened. The table felt electric. Joy countered sharply, truth. So you think viewers are here to hear serious discussion, not a marketing exercise? Kash leaned forward. Yes, Joy viewers deserve honest debate, not snark about looks or ethnicity. Joy huffed. Whoopi clicked her tongue. Sunny shook her head. The network face of The View had gone from casual to combative in 30 seconds. Behind the sheen of studio decorum, an insurgent confrontation was unfolding. Kash, composed in a crisp suit, was about to turn a daytime show into a battleground for dignity. Moments later, the panel moved into national security. Kash launched into sharp critique of current policies, immigration, China classified leaks. But Joy, eyes narrowed, interrupted. So you're proud to defend Trump-era secrecy, she asked. Even if it leaves transparency behind, Kash paused. Protecting sources and methods isn't secrecy for its own sake, it's national defense. Whoopi piped up, that's convenient. But when do we know when it's too much? When does the guard turn to gag? Sunny followed, especially when that secrecy hides bias or wrongdoing. Kash glanced at the trio like a boxer reading opponents before his punch. Transparency matters, he said, but there's a big difference between secrecy to protect lives and petty leaks to make headlines. You can't reduce every defense to shade and spin. They bristled. He'd punctured their framing. Now raising the stakes, Kash pressed his central point. And speaking of headlines, why launch personal digs about my looks or background when you don't challenge my policy, mock the message, or engage it, but don't copy clickbait? By then, the audience was leaning in. Some nodded, others shifted uneasily at Joy's relentless tone. A few hands in the back raised unsure. The mood felt less like chit-chat and more like a showdown. The cameras cut to a commercial break. When they resumed, ABC's executives would already be eyeing Twitter. Stand with Kash was brewing. Clips of his calm rebuttal were already being shared. The panel returned and Kash was ready. What came next would define not just the episode, but a national moment. A moment where civility, respect, and truth met the firestorm of rhetoric and bias. The cameras flicked back on, framing the panel in tight close-up. The stage, lit by overhead warmth, now crackled with tension. Kash Patel, poised and calm, sat anchored like a rock. Joy Behar, her lips pressed in a near-stern line, tapped furiously on her cue cards. Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Hostin exchanged quick glances. The table was set, and the battle was about to continue. Joy leaned forward, a predatory glint in her eye. Joy. So, Cash, you've talked about policy, but we opened with your looks. Why go that route trying to bait viewers as much as host them? Her tone dripped with disdain. Cash didn't blink. Cash, because you did. You turned my appearance into your first talking point. If you don't want that discussed, maybe your question should have been about policy, not headlines. His words landed. The audience shifted in their seats. Whoopi coughed softly. Sunny pressed on. She spoke deliberately. Sunny, you're Indian American. You've spoken of representation. But tell me, do you think shows like this invite your perspective because they're inclusive or because you're the token conservative with minority appeal? Her question felt targeted. Was he leverage? Cash took a calm breath. Cash, look, identity is real. Representation is real. But I'm not a token. I'm here because my views matter, not because of who I am. That interest in identity runs both ways. It can inspire or distract. Which one we pick is up to us. Heads nodded in the audience. A few exchanged glances. Whoopi shook her head. Whoopi, lots of guests come from different backgrounds, but loyalty to country, to democracy, that's what matters here. We've seen some dangerous rhetoric in your corner. How do we know you don't value power over principles? She leaned in tone quiet but sharp. Cash paused, then replied evenly, Cash, criticism is part of democracy, but labeling every dissenting voice as dangerous is lazy. We should weigh words with scrutiny, but not drown out voices asking tough questions. Joy's tone hardened. Joy. So when conservative voices tweet about voter fraud with zero evidence, that's okay, it's just scrutiny. Her finger pointed, the panel looked ready to explode. Cash gazed calmly but firmly. Cash. There are legitimate questions pending judicial review, not imposter stories or baseless conspiracy memes. When evidence emerges, I'll critique. Until then, let's distinguish fact-checking from fear-mongering. A murmur of approval drifted through some audience pockets. Joy's eyes narrowed as the live opener replayed in her mind. Joy. So you weren't just the puppet of Trump, happy to carry his hidden agendas. The insult floated like a gravestone. Cash paused, then leaned forward, calm and assertive. Cash softly. If defending my beliefs makes me a puppet, so be it. But I follow facts, not followers. If that scares people, we shouldn't fear the truth, we should seek it. A 15-second clip of Cash's fact versus fear. Line exploded with 2M plus views in 4 hours. ABC producers started pacing. Sponsorship trackers glowed red. Whoopi raised a conciliatory hand. Whoopi, Cash, let's be fair. This show's meant to be conversational. Shouldn't tough talk come from both sides? Cash gave a thoughtful nod. Cash, absolutely. Tough talk shouldn't equate to cheap shots. That's the difference between debate and bullying. Sunny leaned in, voice low but intense. Sunny, okay, Cash. Last one, if this isn't tokenism, why not critique Democrats who champion woke policies that harm economic mobility in states like Texas? It was a challenge threaded with political calculation. Hit him with specifics. Cash smiled. He was ready. Cash fair. Question. I've criticized anyone Republican or Democrat whose ideology hurts working families. Woke should mean justice, not judgment. But if policy punishes struggling parents more than poverty, we must call it out no matter the label. The studio fell into a hush. Cameras panned over faces, Joy's holding firm, Sunny, thoughtful, Whoopi reserved. The audience reaction, it felt quiet but charged. Thousands of redemptive tokens flashed on screens in their minds. In that silence, a shared epiphany settled. Cash had forced them to debate substance, not snark. To challenge narratives, not individuals. To speak ideas, not insults. As the segment closed, producers cut to the commercial break. But the moment had transcended the show. Cash's calm rebuttals had punctured the View's fortress of scripted talking points. Offstage crew exchanged whispers. She's already trending negatively. They can't edit ignorance out of this. Tomorrow's headlines are written. Where Cash's clips dominate social feeds, ABC execs panic over advertiser uproar. Stand with Cash becomes a broader movement, and talk show hosts scramble to quantify the View's damage control options. The stakes are no longer studio high, they've gone national. As the cameras cut, commercial breaks blurred, but the digital world exploded. Hashtags flared, Stand with Cash. Touchdar view hypocrisy. Facts over fear. TikTok creators looped the fact versus fear. Zinger intercut with reaction shots of Joy's glare. Twitter Tutieks lit up. He dismantled their whole shtick. That panel wasn't ready for substance. Even liberals are warming to Kash's tone. Reddit's RI political analysis churned. He didn't just clap back, he reframed the debate. This isn't about conservatives, it's about standards. Mainstream media picked it up next. CNN played the segment on repeat, contrasting it with left-leaning voices calling Kash a model for reasoned conservatism. MSNBC grilled Joy in follow-up panels. Did her tone backfire? A progressive commentator sighed. Even as someone who doesn't agree politically, that stung. At ABC headquarters, alarms rang. In the ad revenue war room, brand reps flagged campaigns. One communications director confessed, "We kept thinking that moment was scripted, but the network didn't anticipate real confrontation." Executive emails circulated behind closed doors. "We need a full cleanup. Do we double down with apologies or stay silent? Riskier, Joy doubles down, or we pivot." Producers huddled with legal issues. Would Kash's rebukes invite defamation claims? Their consultant advised caution. The clip is factual and his words are theirs, but avoid escalation. Other shows seized the moment. Fox News branded Kash as the conservative who cracked the mold. Sean Hannity displayed the clip over multiple segments praising his composure. Joe Rogan invited Kash onto the show, though, not surprising, the reaction was seismic. Their 2-hour conversation blurred the lines between policy and culture war. Kash. This isn't tribal. It's about bringing back a baseline of respect. Rogan amen to that. On social media, liberal influencers were forced to respond. One Gen Z advocate tweeted, "People are praising a conservative for decency." That's how broken our debates got. Another posted, "Does it make me a centrist if I think both sides need more cash and less noise?" Tracker apps lit red, advertiser confidence dipped. A major car brand paused its weekly slots. A cosmetics sponsor demanded an on-air apology before restarting placements. ABC's stock wavered, albeit modestly, but enough to prompt board-level attention. Conversely, Kash's profile soared. Online donations to his newly formed Unfiltered Lines Foundation doubled ahead of his next podcast. Ticket sales for his university tour spiked too. UC Berkeley tripled their hall capacity after audience demand exploded. Behind the scenes at The View, nerves frayed. Joy faced pressure. Internal texts leaked ratings are steady, but social sentiment is negative. She's losing the narrative. Sunny, always politically strategic, requested a sit-down meeting. She argued, "We need a response that doesn't erase intent but addresses perception." On-air retribution was minimal. Joy opened the next show with perfunctory thank you for tuning in, visibly avoiding reference to the clip. Sunny offered a vague reflection on media tone. Whoopi Ever the Firebrand stated, "We're wrestling with substance versus style, and that's okay." But the spark had already ignited. Outside televised loops, grassroots shifted tone. Stand with Kash streams became community-funded. Creators recorded Twitch streams reanalyzing the exchange. A tiny letter newsletter penned by a college professor reached virality with the headline, "When the View Didn't View Self, the Power of One Truthful Voice." Even some ABC advertisers sent supportive notes to Kash's foundation praising the demand for civil discourse. As one brand marketer told a trade paper anonymously, "If ads sit beside civility, we want to be part of that context." Cultural critics pounced. A Vox essay asked, "Is the View's snark a symptom of entertainment-driven politics?" One line stood out, "When leaps from substance to insult, it underestimates audiences." Television analysts noted a spike in talk shows simplifying polarizing figures but not necessarily political content. Newspapers ran features, "Meet the Conservative Talking Sense." Could Kash Patel be a middle road blueprint? Kash's team ready to press release. It began. We're glad the conversation shifted from cheap shots to public dialogue. Next, a televised civil discourse initiative. Part of it included a View Kash town hall, a proposed moderated debate between him and the panel, live without censor. Joy and Sunny evaluated options should they appear. ABC's risk consultants feared a repeat blow-up, but executives recognized attention mattered. This moment became a cultural touchstone. CBS morphed its format, exploring fact or fear news breaks. Podcasts retooled their host dynamics. Even Fox splintered between war room amps and reasoned round tables. But at the center remained Cash's composed rebuttals. He didn't just win that segment, he ignited widespread change. In the wake of that explosive appearance, the ripple effect extended far beyond studio walls. Soon after Part 3 aired, thousands of college students across the country were organizing impromptu civility circles gatherings where people of differing opinions came together not to argue but to listen. Their guiding principle: no interruptions, no insults, just truth-seeking dialogue. Hesitant at first but curious media studies programs at major universities began integrating these formats into their curricula, challenging students to emulate the tone that had rocked The View. Some professors emailed, "We used the Stand with Cash clip as a case study. It worked like a social reset." Meanwhile, alumni associations at Ivy League schools funded small grants to host unfiltered debates, open forums where talk show hosts, journalists, and activists sparred not with one-liners but with facts and empathy. It was first met with skepticism. Could this be more than a trend? But good faith carried the day. Students shared chat logs. We actually understood each other's position. At the same time, conservative and moderate lawmakers quietly remarked to staffers, referencing that viral moment. One Capitol Hill aide observed Cash's tone sparked a shift. Everyone got tired of shouting. We're seeing earnest push for bipartisan hearings. Soon, gentle bipartisan task forces aimed at responsible media practices started emerging, nominally acknowledging Cash's influence. The Digital Civility Caucus brought together lawmakers from both parties to draft principles for respectful public discourse without infringing on speech. Back at The View, a pivot had begun. With the cameras off, producers wrote a memo emphasizing tone calibration. They drafted segment guidelines: one more space for guests to respond, 2 fewer pre-scripted zingers, 3 mandatory debrief after each intense exchange to reflect, not spin. Joy replied via internal email, "I understand. Time to reset." Sunny volunteered to facilitate a focus group with audience members that weekend, not to defend The View, but to refine how they respond under fire. When Cash announced a civic exchange campus tour, partnering with the Washington Central University scrambled to host him. The first event at Berkeley sold out in hours. Students of all ideologies asked tough questions about free speech media, bias, identity politics, intentional insults. He answered with a tenet he repeated often: point me to hypocrisy, I'll address it. But show me nuance and I'm listening. That tour reverberated. Clips went viral. Public radio picked them up. One interviewer asked Cash about his critics, and he replied coolly, "Ask me about substance, not style." The phrase became a meme in journalistic circles. Reporters remarked that if fact-checking was still popular, tone-checking was now trending. Meanwhile, ABC reached out to Cash's team about a town hall format. They rehearsed off-camera a roundtable including Joy, Sunny, Cash, plus an academic moderator, 20 audience members, and live streaming. Logistics aimed for transparency: handwritten audience question cards, no padding, no spin. On the day of the Across the Aisle live broadcast, the contrast was stark. Sparking something unprecedented in daytime television, the participants spoke honestly without scripting. Cash pressed gently on bias. Joy admitted she'd let emotion overtake intent. Sunny acknowledged she'd raised identity without focusing on policy. The questions: student debt, media consolidation, online harassment, were blunt. And the answers were grounded. In the hours after, critics on both sides praised the evening. Twitter threads like "Jow grown up television" emerged. Some admitted surprises: liberal viewers saying, "I found myself agreeing with Cash, at least he showed respect." Conservatives commenting, "Joy's honesty surprised me." Even progressive outlets praised the change. One headline read, "The View didn't go viral, it went honest." Within 48 hours, sponsors drafted letters to ABC: "Thanks for rethinking your tone." Said one, a major telecom brand sent a note to Cash's foundation: "We'd like to partner for media literacy events." Another university pledged funding to continue the civic exchange for next year. More impressively, during a congressional briefing on press ethics, lawmakers referenced the event. One moderate rep remarked that show modeled what congressional hearings should be: tough, honest, respectful. It wasn't law yet, but it was a shift in expectations. Public commentary mirrored this change. A Vox commentator wrote, "We don't need less debate, we need better debate." A Rolling Stone op-ed argued that perhaps the public had tired of shouting matches and was ready to hear nuance again. In podcasts, the Cash Conversation Blueprint began cropping up. Show producers dissected the format, rethinking how they framed guests and follow-ups. Ratings for politically charged shows stabilized, but viewers increasingly demanded substance with civility. Of course, backlash persisted. Some pundits accused Cash of overreaching, of forming an echo chamber of moderation. Joy's critics on the right labeled her the new leftist warrior. But her response was crucial. She doubled down on tone, not targets. She appeared on Cash's podcast and said, "He reminded me that we all have to earn our next word." The moment etched a public apology still rooted in conviction. By the week's end, ABC submitted its segment guidelines to the Television Academy as a case study. Officials across networks quietly reviewed their own practices, some requesting renegotiation of host contracts to include tone clauses. Journalism schools added a module, engagement ethics building YouTube civility, not just viral. Following the Across the Aisle broadcast, the impact rippled far beyond ABC's soundstage. In the wake of that viral evening, Part 5 unfolds not inside courtrooms or primetime spats, but in backroom boardrooms, academic halls, political caucus calls, and the quiet revolution stirring beneath national headlines. It didn't take long for industry titans to take notice. Sponsors of The View and similar shows began quietly rewriting contracts. One major streaming service inserted clauses requiring respectful discourse and diversity of perspectives, no scripted jabs, no identity-first snark. Executives at other networks asked to review the guidelines Cash co-authored with ABC. How can we encourage vigorous debate without resorting to tribal taunts? A wave of public commitments followed. Network X pledges balanced civil discourse. We are updating panel formats to minimize hostility. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Meanwhile, the grassroots movement fueled by Cash's Civility Campus Tour gained traction. Student governments at major universities passed formal codes urging debate clubs to prioritize respectful interaction. Penalties included media training sessions and mandatory apologies for demeaning language. A coalition of professors across 30 universities signed an open letter. In classrooms, talk shows, town halls, ideas win with substance, not smears. Debate League organizers revamped rules: no personal insults, no ad hominems, no interruptions. The political reverberations were equally notable. Congressional offices, especially those participating in the new Digital Civility Caucus, circulated the Civility Charter drafted after Across the Aisle. Legislative aides referenced how the show modeled hearings peers, holding differing views but not treating each other as enemies. One senator remarked off the record, "We need that tone in committee rooms." A bipartisan working group began exploring non-binding resolutions to promote respectful public discourse, first in politics, later extending to media regulation. Yet not everyone cheered. Critics on the left accused Cash of sanitizing discourse, of ignoring systemic biases. Critics on the right warned that tone policing would mute conservative voices. The backlash came in editorials and podcast call-ins. Cash's civility is code for compromise. Why can't we just speak plainly? But even amid pushback, the broader trend held sway, more voices defending the right to strong opinion without the personal attacks. On Reddit, the subreddit r civility revolution surged. Threads dissected tense interviews, praising moments where participants paused before responding or when hosts intervened to enforce respect. Top posts weren't attacks, they were breakdowns. Notice how Joy asks a genuine question here, not a gotcha, solid discussion. Upvotes skyrocketed. A grassroots campaign petitioning news channels to label civility champions emerged, celebrating hosts who modeled it. Imgur even saw new memes non-snarky, ironically, with captions like "debate without the disgrace." Meanwhile, Cash's podcast network expanded. The flagship Unfiltered Lines released Voices Rising monthly episodes pairing ideological opposites tackling real-world issues. A December recording featured a Black Lives Matter activist and a police union rep discussing body cam legislation. The encounter was respectful, not empty, but deeply probing. Viewers watched the transformation from a sensational clash to thoughtful confrontation. Critics praised its tone, audiences praised its honesty, and ratings ticked upward. In Hollywood, Citrine Media produced a documentary, Civility in the Screen Age, premiering at Sundance. Interviews ranged from Cash's campus events to sitting parliamentarians in Canada adopting his model. The film's thesis, aggressive discourse, erodes trust not just in public figures but in institutions. The Q&A sold out. The festival buzz was real. Festivals that followed invited panels dissecting whether civility's rise threatened freedom of expression or simply enforced respect. The conversation resonated. Back at ABC internal communications show Renewed Hope, a memo circulated praising The View's ratings hold and brand uplift. Advertising revenue stabilized, brands opted in, not out. Viewership surveys reflected that 67% of regular audiences appreciated the balanced tone. 52% said they were more likely to invite guests to watch. One executive emailed civility didn't kill controversy, it refined it. Within Kash's team strategy pivoted again. Fundraising for university debate grants expanded to K-12 civic ED programs. The initiative was renamed Voices First, expanding to teach how to disagree well. Pilot events in Chicago and Atlanta saw teachers reporting calmer classrooms and more inclusive conversations among kids who had previously tuned out heated politics. In Washington, a hearing on newsroom ethics elevated on CS-PAN. Kash testified alongside media scholars pushing for voluntary transparency charters, outlining sources, confirmation processes, and funding. He referenced the show format as a model for accountability and tone. One moderate senator quipped, "Why can't cable news be more like daytime TV?" Laughter followed and bipartisan applause. Amid the reform momentum, Part 5 also reveals the subtle wins and sobering limits. While some loud cable talk radio producers scrambled to hire civility coaches, others doubled down. They dismissed the trend as fleeting feel-good fluff, but even they couldn't ignore the advertiser memos. One leaked note warned brand safety demands fewer slurs. Politicians, too, nodded carefully. In campaign ads, more candidates pledged respectful debate. One senator ran a spot, dignified tone, not divisive trumpets. The spot contrasted angry rallies with town halls featuring applause for civil discourse. But it wasn't universal. Social media wars raged. One conservative influencer viciously attacked Kash as a globalist shill. A progressive podcaster mocked him as a pawn in the truth-numbing movement. Yet these counter-influences seemed overshadowed by the swell of mainstream buy-in. Passionate voices existed, but they couldn't drown out the rising chorus calling for civilized talk. This is the landscape of Part 5, a media moment that morphed into institutional momentum. Contracts, redefined classrooms, reformed legislatures, listening network brass recalibrating. The world isn't suddenly polite, but the rules of engagement are shifting in measurable ways. The question now is whether this will hold, or if at the next election cycle, the old tactics reclaim their dominance. And so the movement marches on. With civility now tracked in policy memos, brand guidelines, and university curricula, the narrative has changed. Debate may be heated, but it no longer needs to burn. The ripple effects from Kash Patel's media intervention didn't stop at ratings or podcast charts. By the time Part 6 unfolded, the movement had matured into formal systems of blueprint embedded into media education and politics. ABC, once shaken by the backlash, finalized its internal reforms. Every on-air host underwent mandatory discourse ethics training. A new content guideline was circulated emphasizing rigor without ridicule and debate without dismissal. A year after Kash's initial appearance, ABC launched a new series across lines modeled after the format Kash introduced. Co-hosts were required to represent opposing views and were graded by viewer surveys on respect shown, fact clarity, and empathy demonstrated. The pilot episode drew 2.4 million viewers and a 92% approval rating. Meanwhile, the National Association of Broadcasters announced a new initiative, the Certification in Public Discourse. Modeled after medical board exams, it evaluated journalists, panelists, and producers on ethics, fact validation, and tone. Networks boasting certified talent began winning back sponsors, lost to culture war fatigue. Colleges integrated the civility curriculum with Kash's framework, now a case study in over 200 communication programs. Legislatively, a bipartisan task force proposed the Media Responsibility Index, a public database rating shows not by ideology, but by veracity and tone. Kash testified again, urging transparency, not censorship. We aren't here to silence opinion, we're here to spotlight integrity. By year's end, the narrative had shifted. Kash Patel wasn't just a figurehead, he was the unlikely architect of a quieter revolution, one that made civility viable again in American public life. Not by silencing critics, but by daring them to listen.